Okay. Let's see who pops up. Okay, everybody. When you come on, give me a shout out. And we'll get started. Well, this might be interesting tonight. I should wait a minute or two before I come on, but I'll get started here even if everyone comes on later. We'll get started in a few minutes. Well, here we go, I think. I see somebody popping up there. I can't tell who that is, so put your name in below so I can kind of see who's who. But hello, whoever you are, because I can't see that tiny little... There we go. Come on in. Well, hey, Lisa, how are you? I haven't learned everybody's little circles, and it's hard to see. I hope everybody's doing good. I really like tonight's chapter. Has everybody had a good day so far? Lisa, where are you from? I know I could probably go to your Facebook page and find out, but where are you from? I'm going to wait about 30 or 45 seconds and then we'll go ahead and get started. Give me a shout out when you can. I see a few more circles up there, just hard to tell who's who. So I have seen a lot of people put up their Christmas trees. Good. Hey, Miss Judy. Good for Melanie. That is an answer to prayer. Oh, okay. I know who you are now. Okay, Lisa. Judy Harris's daughter. Okay. Well, that's great news. I had seen where Miss Judy had posted that, I think it was yesterday, that the test results had all come back good. So that's an answer to prayer for sure. So I also saw where Miss Judy had her Christmas tree up. I'm thinking about putting mine up here in just a few minutes. I'm ready to get to Christmas. I know we shouldn't rush things, but I'm so there. So, all right, I'm going to wait about 30 more seconds and we'll get started. You may want your Bible out. Yeah. I mean, basically, you really just need to read Genesis. I think it starts in chapter 37 with the life of Joseph, and it's one that we're all familiar with. You have 3 up so far? Oh, you must love to decorate. I'm good to get 1 up. I am good to get 1 tree up, Lisa. And this year we went with a smaller tree. I didn't go with a large tree this year. We went with a smaller tree. I know everybody's getting ready for Thanksgiving too, so yes, Miss Judy, I love Christmas time. I love sitting in the living room and turning all the lights off and just looking at the tree. Hey, Miss Rachel, how are you? Been thinking about you and Brother Rich and praying. Hope all is well, and it will be. Stay in your circle, girlfriend. Stay in your circle. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is The Bait of Satan by John Bevere. And while it may be an old book, probably 10 or 15 years old, it is still very relevant for us today. Last week we had talked about 2 types of people. He kind of categorized two types of people. One category was those that have been genuinely mistreated. They've been genuinely done wrong. That's the first category. And the second category was you thought you'd been mistreated. You really hadn't, but you thought you had, and you took great offense at that. So tonight we're going to be looking at a very familiar story in the Bible, a very important lesson, and that's coming from Joseph. And it pretty much starts in Genesis around chapter 36 or 37. And it's a story that we all know, but nevertheless, oh, I love it, Miss Rachel. You're doing a 4-foot Charlie Brown tree. I thought about doing a snowman. But nevertheless, it's one that we need to look at every now and then. And I want to give the definition of what it means to suffer. And he says suffer is to feel or bear what is painful, what is disagreeable, what is distressing to the body or to the mind. Okay, Miss Judy, I see that. And what is inconvenient or to be injured or to contain loss or damage. And he says the original meaning of the word suffer in Latin is to beat up or endure and not sink under, to suffering. And tonight I'm going to be doing a lot of reading tonight. It was just too good to try to paraphrase. I'm going to be doing a lot of reading tonight. So we're going to look at Joseph. And we all kind of know the story of Joseph. Joseph loved God. He loved his dad. He was loyal to God. He was loyal to his dad. But and we know that Jacob favored Joseph, and that caused a lot of jealousy among his brothers, among his siblings. It caused an awful lot of jealousy because Jacob did favor him. You know that he made him a coat of many colors. You know that Joseph had a couple of dreams that I don't even think he really had to interpret them to his brothers. They knew by the dream what it meant, that they were going to bow down to him one day. And so they became very jealous and very envious of Joseph. And you know the story, they threw him in a pit, and then they got him out of the pit and they sold him into slavery. And he eventually wound up at the house of Potiphar. And he was there around 10 years or so. You know that Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. She accused him of rape, sexual harassment, if you will. Even though he was innocent, he was found guilty and thrown into a prison. Not a jail, but a prison. And their prison was down underground, no lights, no nothing. They were good to get bread and water. And so Joseph was stripped of everything that was familiar to him. He was stripped of his home, his family. He was stripped of his identity. In Bible times, the father would leave an inheritance to their children. Good evening, Miss Gail. And they stripped Joseph of their father's inheritance. And they wanted to see, they made this statement that when they got ready to sell him, they said, let's sell him and let's see what becomes of his dreams then. Good evening, Miss Carol. So you know that story, and just go back and read it and make yourself familiar with it. I just kind of got a newness on it. Billy Graham said this, and I want to read this. Hold on one second. Billy Graham said, we may not always understand why God allows certain things to happen to us, but he is able to bring good out of evil and triumph out of suffering. Now, Sunday in children's church, our lesson was on the goodness of God, and it was on this lesson about Joseph. And as I started reading the lesson to the children, I would stop at a certain point. For instance, when they threw Joseph in the pit, when his brothers threw him in its pit, I looked at the kids and I said, can you see the goodness of God? And they're going, no. When he was taken out of the pit and sold into slavery, I said, can you see the goodness of God yet? And they said, no. When I told them how Potiphar's wife had lied to her husband about Joseph and something that he did not do, I said, can you see the goodness of God? And they said, no. Hello, Miss Rebecca. I said, when Joseph was thrown into a prison, and to a dungeon. I said, kids, can you see the goodness of God yet? And they're going, no. But tonight, we're going to see the goodness of God, just as the children saw it. And we're going to see how Joseph handled being offended. If anybody had a right to be offended, it was Joseph. And Joseph was human. And I don't know about y'all, and he gives this description in the book, and I'm just going to read it because I have said this to the Lord before on more than one occasion. I might have worded it a little bit different, but when you're going through an offense or you feel like someone has mistreated you, and he asked these questions. He said, can you hear Joseph's thoughts in the damp darkness of the dungeon? I served my master, talking about Potiphar, with honesty and integrity for over 10 years. I am more faithful than his wife. Now, this is just thoughts that the author is trying to say that Joseph might have thought. I stayed loyal to God and my master, daily fleeing sexual immorality. What is my reward? A dungeon. It seems that the more I try to do what is right, the worse it gets. Oh, my. Has anybody said that? The more that I try to do what is right, the worse that it gets. How could God allow this? Give me a show of hands if you've ever asked any of these questions. Could my brother steal my promise from God too? Why hasn't this mighty covenant God intervened on my behalf? I've asked that. Is this how a loving Father and faithful God cares for his servants? Why me? I've asked that. What have I done to deserve this? I've asked that. I only believed I heard from God. I've said that. I'm sure he wrestled, he goes on to say, with these thoughts or something similar. He had very limited freedom in his life, but he still had the right to choose his response to all that had happened to him. And that's your bottom line right there. Would he become offended and bitter toward his brothers and eventually toward God? Would he give up hope of all the promises that God had made him, the dreams that he had had? And he says, I imagine it never crossed Joseph's mind until it was all over that this was God's process to prepare him to rule. And he says Joseph had to learn, and this is a good line right here. He said when Joseph had his dreams, he saw them as confirmation of the favor on his life. Joseph was young, remember that. Joseph had not yet learned that authority is given to serve, not to set you apart. Now, I want you to get that. Authority is given to you to serve, not to set you apart. So many times we think that, how can I word this nicely? I'm really trying to think about this. So many times people think they want to be on platform or they want to be on ministry. They see the title, but minister means to serve. Authority is given to serve, not to rule over, okay? And in those training periods, we focus on the impossibility of circumstances instead of the greatness of God, okay? When we face the fact that God could have prevented our whole mess and didn't, we often blame God. We want someone to blame. We're going to blame others. I have blamed God before. I have. I'll just be real transparent. I've asked all these questions. God, why? Why didn't you stop this? Why didn't you intervene in this? What have I done to deserve this? Did I mess up somewhere? I've asked all these questions. And Joseph had to live in accordance to what he knew about God. And he asked this question: how often do we hear our brothers and sisters fall into the same trap of assigning blame? Sometimes you have to take responsibility for your own actions and your own words. For instance, and he gives examples. If it weren't for my wife, I would be in the ministry. She's hindered me and ruined me so much that I can't. If it weren't for my parents, I wouldn't be the way that I am. I've heard that. They are to blame for what I am today. If it weren't for my pastor repressing the gift that is in me, I would have a ministry. Sound familiar? If it weren't for my former husband, my kids and I wouldn't be in this financial shape. If it wasn't for that woman or that man in that church, I'd still be in favor with the leaders. So we're trying to find someone to blame. And the list goes on and on. But he says, I want to emphasize this. Absolutely no man, woman, child, or devil can ever get you out of the will of God. No one but God holds your destiny. Joseph's brothers tried to destroy him. They tried to destroy the vision that God had given him. Even when they asked the question, like I said a while ago, what will become of his dreams? Now that we've sold him into slavery, what will become of his dreams? They were out to destroy him. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. They intentionally got rid of their brother. And they sold him as that slave. And he asked this question, and here again, he just gives some good things to ponder. Now, do you think that when they sold him as a slave, God in heaven looked at the Son and the Holy Spirit and asked this question, what are we going to do now? You know, sometimes when things happen to us, we don't see that big picture and we become offended and we want to blame others. We want to blame God. Nothing catches God off guard. I don't know the outcome of this presidential election. I have no clue, but God does. But even if it doesn't go the way that we think it needs to go, or the person that we want to get in office doesn't get in office, do you really think that God is sitting up in heaven going, hey, Jesus, what we going to do now? He didn't get in. This person got in. What we going to do now? What's our backup? We got a plan B? No. God has everything in control. There is no alternate plan that God has to come up with. And he says many Christians respond to crisis situations as if this is exactly what happens in heaven. Can you just see the Father asking Jesus, this guy just got fired. He's a fellow believer. He's paid his tithes. He's been faithful. What are we going to do now? No. God doesn't turn to Jesus and say, hey, are there any jobs down there you can hook him up with? Nothing catches God off guard, okay? And he says, and he gives examples. He said, here's Sally. She's 34 and she's not married yet. Do you think God looks over at Jesus and says, hey, you got any available guys? No. All right? The man I wanted her to marry got married to her best friend. I mean, he gives all kind of scenarios here. And it sounds absurd, yet we react the same way that some of these statements are in here. I'm guilty. I know I'm guilty. All right? But through them, the Lord Jesus will eventually come, and Joseph stayed free from offense. And this is what we need to get. That no matter how bad we've been treated, no matter how bad someone has talked about us and tried to ruin your character or your integrity, we need to stay free from offense so that God can still use us. And he says in here, prison was a time of sifting for Joseph, but it was also a time of opportunity. And he goes on to share how that, of course, the baker and, what do you call the guy that gave the wine to the king? How that they both had dreams, and Joseph was able to interpret those dreams, and they came to pass. And he talks about how that when he interpreted Pharaoh's dream to him, how that he told Pharaoh, you need to put somebody in charge that can oversee the 7 years of food and of plenty and set it aside. And we know that God put Joseph second in command. And so Sunday, when we got to this part with the kids, and I said, kids, Joseph was second in command to Pharaoh. I said, can you see the goodness of God yet? And they started doing this like this right here. Like, yeah, Yeah, kind of, sort of. But God knew what Joseph's brothers would do before they did it. And as a matter of fact, the Lord knew they would do it before he gave Joseph the dream or before any of those boys were born. There is nothing that happens on this earth that our God does not know ahead of time. God knows, okay? And Joseph ended up blessing those who had cursed him. And he says, to go one step further, I want us to look at Joseph and look at what Joseph said to his brothers. He said, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. Okay? For God sent me before you to preserve life. Now, we know that. And when I read that to the kids Sunday, I said, do you see the goodness of God yet? And they started nodding yes. And I said, how do you see the goodness of God in all of this? And one of the kids raised their hand and they said, well, he was able to feed his family. I said, that's correct. I said he was able to feed his brothers that had mistreated him. He was able to feed them. I said, but what else? Joseph not only saved his family, he saved all of Egypt. And we compared that to how Jesus Christ died on the cross for all of us. And Joseph goes on to tell his brothers, he says, for these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years left of this. But God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me, but God. You know, sometimes God does allow us to go through offenses. Sometimes God allows us to go through storms and circumstances that are out of our control, that we don't understand, that we question him on. But looking back on things later on down the road, you can see God's hand, you know, in this. Here again, I'll be a little transparent. I married way too young. I was 17. Married a young man that was going to be a preacher, he said. 6 weeks later, I found out preaching wasn't in him. Nevertheless, long story short, he ran off with someone else almost 2 years later. And I went through a process of why? All my life, God, I've always served the Lord. Since I was a little girl, I've always served you. My desire was to be a preacher's wife. Hello, that was my desire. So God, why did you allow this to happen? Why did you allow me to marry this man? Because you knew he wasn't what he said he was. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing. I did not recognize that. And so I blamed God. And for about a year there, I was very rebellious because I did not understand why the Lord allowed that to happen. Now, looking back on it, I can tell you that down through the years, there have been many, many women that I have had the chance to minister to because I know what it feels like to be rejected. I know what it feels like to be unloved or to feel like you're unloved. I know what it feels like to, you wonder if you'll ever love again. I know all those feelings. So down through the years, I have prayed with many people, you know, regarding that. And looking back on my life now, oh my Lord, I'm so blessed. God has so blessed me with a wonderful husband. Vince just can't be beat. I have 3 beautiful children, 8 grandchildren, fixing to have a 9th in February. God has blessed. But I couldn't see all of that 43, 44 years ago. All I could see was, God, why? I had to let those offenses go. I had to forgive that man. And that wasn't easy to do, but I had to forgive him so that I could move on because I knew that God had a purpose for me. I knew that there was a destiny for me, and I knew it was going to be left up to me and how I responded to things that have happened. And he said over in Psalms 105, he says, moreover, he, God, called for a famine in the land. He destroyed all the provision of bread, but he set a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave, Who sent Joseph? It wasn't his brothers. Joseph would have got to Egypt if his brothers hadn't have sold him, okay? It was God. God sent him. And out of the mouth of two witnesses, we see that it was God who sent him. Joseph said plainly, it was not you who sent me, it was God. No mortal man, I want you to get this, no mortal man or devil can supersede the plans of God for your life. No one can. No mortal man, no devil. If you lay hold of this truth, and it will set you free. There is only one person who can get you out of the will of God. Guess who that is? That's us. That's you. There's only one person that can get me out of the will of God, and that's me. That's me. And he says, their offense. Now, I want you to listen to it. Well, let me do this. Consider the children of Israel. God has sent a deliverer. He has sent Moses to lead them out of bondage into the promised land. And he says, after a year in the desert, the leaders went out to spy the land. You know that. 12 of them went out. 2 came back, said, we got it. The other 10 said, no, we can't. All the people, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, agreed with their leaders. The people felt as if God had brought them out to die. The majority of your people felt that. They were offended with Moses. They were offended with God. This pattern had been going on for a year. Their offense, now you get this, their offense resulted in that generation never seeing the land God promised that they would possess. Okay? Because of their offense, because of how they reacted to circumstances, there was a generational curse that had to be broken. And he says, many people have been serving the Lord fervently and have come into difficult life situations because of being mistreated by either men, wicked men, or I'll just go ahead and tell you, by Christians. The truth is that they have been treated unjustly, but to become offended would only fulfill the enemy's purpose on your life. We cannot pick up this spirit of offense. We have to forgive and move on. And he says, if you stay free from offense, you will stay in God's will. If you become offended, you will be taken captive by the enemy, because you will rehash that circumstance. You will rehash that offense over and over and over again, and it will eat away at you. And remember, the only person that can take you out of your destiny, what God has planned for you, is you yourself. It's you. He says, we must remember that nothing can come against us without the Lord's knowledge of it before it ever happens. And he reads this. This is in 1 Corinthians 10 and 13. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but will, with the temptation, will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it. Notice he says the way of escape, not a way of escape. It's just the way of escape. God has already seen every adverse circumstance we will encounter, no matter how great or small, and he has planned the way for escaping it. And even more thrilling, often the thing that looks like an abortion of God's plan actually ends up being the road to fulfillment if we stay in obedience and free from offense. I don't want to risk aborting the purpose on my life by being disobedient. And he says, not many of us have suffered the treatment of Joseph. It would not have been painful if his enemies did this. And remember, we kind of talked about this last week, how that sometimes you expect things from your enemies. People that you don't really know, if they say something to you, that ain't gonna bother me. But if it's people at church, if it's your family, your brothers, your sisters, a close friend, it can cut to the heart. And he says it would not have been painful if his enemies had done this, but these were his brothers. These were his flesh and blood. They were the ones who were supposed to encourage and support, defend, and care for him. Could there be a worse case of scenario than that which Joseph had endured? So that's what he's talking about tonight is why me? Why did this happen to me? If you're going through something now, or you're still dealing with something from the past, let it go. Ask the Lord to help you to deal with this offense. And maybe you have truly been mistreated. Maybe there's two categories. Remember, those that have been truly offended, and then those that just think they've been mistreated or offended. So you've got to find out which category you fit in. And either one, you really just need to ask for forgiveness. Whoever's hurt you, whoever has said something to you, let it go, people. Let it go. Like that song in Frozen, just let it go. Let it go so that God can do what he needs to do in your life. Amen. This really is a good study. I would love to do this and show you some of the videos that this guy does, because it's really good. Next week, he's going to talk about my father, and looks like he's going to be talking about rebellion. Ooh, that ought to be good too. Guys, I'm so glad you come on and join us. I know you're taking time out of your Wednesday night to do this, and I appreciate it. Just read Joseph. Start with Genesis. I think it's chapter 37 or so, and just kind of take it all the way to the end, and read it, and just ask the Holy Spirit to help you with any offense that you might have. Amen. Now, we'll do next Wednesday night. I will do one next Wednesday, but then the following Wednesday we'll take off because it will be, of course, getting ready for Thanksgiving. I know I don't get to see a lot of y'all on Sunday morning. I'm usually running back and forth. I don't know if Brother Jimmy's still on there, but if he is, thank you, Brother Jimmy, for the pecans. I have been munching on them. They are delicious. So, but it's good to see y'all on here, and it's good to see you at church. And just give me a shout out, even at church. I may just run by you and say, hey, because my mind's on other things, and I hate to say that. And I'm trying to retrain my mind to stop and speak to people. But I love you all. I appreciate you all. And more importantly, with this election, let's don't get riled up about it. Let's remember that God knows who our next president is. God's got it in control. Nothing's taking him off guard. He sees the big picture. Now, do I think prayer can change some things? You betcha. And we need to be praying for our nation. And we need to be praying for the next president of the United States. You need to be praying for your church and for your pastor. We need direction and guidance. And that's just across the board. They are predicting and they are seeing the numbers of this COVID virus go up. But you know what? God can bring those numbers down, and we need to get those numbers down. So I love you all. We'll keep praying and believing, and I hope to see you soon. Have a great weekend. I love y'all so much, and we'll see you Sunday. And if I don't, then I'll see you on here next Wednesday night. God bless.